At 3 a.m., under a freeway overpass in Los Angeles, a man named Kevin sits on the edge of a concrete barrier. His hands are wrapped around a paper cup of cold coffee. Behind him, a row of tents trembles as trucks rumble past. He used to have a house in the suburbs, a steady job at a warehouse, and a wife who made pancakes on Sundays. Now, he has a tarp, a sleeping bag, and a memory of how life used to feel. Every night, nearly 660,000 Americans experience homelessness, a number higher than at any point in the past 15 years. And despite billions of dollars in federal and state programs, that number keeps growing. The question is simple, but the answer isn't. Why? For decades, the American dream promised stability to anyone willing to work hard. But the cracks beneath that dream have widened. Rents have soared, in some cities by over 30% in 5 years. Meanwhile, wages for low-income workers have barely moved. For every new apartment built in a major metro, there are 3 families waiting and thousands priced out. Kevin's story isn't rare. In fact, it's becoming alarmingly common. The new homeless aren't just those struggling with addiction or mental illness, though those issues remain real. They're retail clerks, caregivers, and delivery drivers. Many of them have jobs. They just don't have homes. Economists call them the working homeless. In California alone, nearly 1 in 4 homeless individuals reports being employed. Cities are trying to keep up, but the math doesn't work. Each new, affordable housing unit can cost over $500,000 to build in Los Angeles. Shelters are full. Wait lists stretch for months. Local governments launch initiatives with bold names: Homes for All, Project Room Key, Safe Haven. Yet for every person housed, another 3 fall into homelessness. The deeper truth is that homelessness in America isn't one problem. It's the collision of many. Housing costs, stagnant wages, mental health, addiction, broken families, and policy paralysis. For decades, politicians have argued over causes while ignoring the systems that feed it. Experts point to a structural shift, what some call the housing crisis of the middle class. In the 1970s, a family earning the median income could afford a house almost anywhere. Today, that same family is 1 missed paycheck away from eviction. The safety net that once caught the falling has frayed. And yet, for millions, homelessness remains invisible until it shows up in their own neighborhood, until a tent appears by the freeway, or someone sleeps outside the grocery store they visit each morning. For Kevin, for thousands like him, the distance between stability and the street was just a few bad weeks. So why is this happening in the richest nation on earth? And if we already know the causes, housing, wages, healthcare, why can't we stop it? Because the real numbers reveal something far more unsettling. Something no one wants to admit. In the heart of New York City, just blocks from Wall Street, the contrast couldn't be sharper. Gleaming skyscrapers rise above streets lined with luxury boutiques, while on the sidewalks below, dozens of people sit on cardboard mats, huddled against the winter chill. Some hold signs asking simply for a meal, a blanket, or a moment of human recognition. Homelessness is not evenly spread across America. Cities like New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco shoulder a disproportionate share of the crisis. But smaller cities and rural towns are not immune. In recent years, homelessness has surged in places like Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Nashville. Experts point to a mix of high housing costs, limited mental health services, and gaps in social programs. The causes are intertwined. Job loss is an obvious trigger, but not the only one. Medical emergencies can wipe out savings overnight. In fact, medical debt contributes to nearly 60% of personal bankruptcies in the U.S., and for some, that leads directly to losing their homes. Divorce, eviction, and addiction can follow quickly. Once a person becomes homeless, staying employed or finding housing becomes exponentially harder. Veterans are another visible group. While representing only a small percentage of the general population, they make up about 8% of the homeless in the U.S. Many return home carrying invisible wounds, PTSD, physical injuries, and the loss of community. Programs exist to help veterans, HUD-VASH vouchers, supportive housing, but bottlenecks and limited funding leave many in tents or shelters for months. Mental health is often discussed, sometimes unfairly blamed, for homelessness. While mental illness is present in a segment of the homeless population, research shows that structural factors like poverty and housing costs are far more predictive. In fact, studies indicate that only about 25% of the homeless population struggles with serious mental illness. Addiction, similarly, is a factor, but not the sole cause. The social stigma around homelessness compounds the problem. Families are ashamed to ask for help. People assume that homelessness is a choice, when in reality, for many, it's a series of unfortunate events, a cascade of financial, health, and social pressures that no safety net can fully absorb. Some cities have turned to controversial policies. Sit-lie laws criminalize sitting or lying on public sidewalks. Sweeps of encampments clear streets but do not provide sustainable housing solutions. Critics argue these actions merely push people from one corner to another, offering the illusion of control while the underlying crisis deepens. Meanwhile, neighborhoods argue about where shelters should be located. Property values and NIMBY sentiments often stall projects that could provide housing. It becomes a battle between perception and reality. Citizens want safety and order, but they often resist the one solution that could actually help the homeless population stabilize. Across the country, the numbers tell a stark story. Homelessness is climbing. Resources are limited, and solutions are complex. For Kevin and countless others, every day is a negotiation. Between finding a safe place to sleep, maintaining a job, and navigating a system that often feels indifferent. And yet, amid these statistics and policy debates, human stories persist. Stories of resilience, of people finding small victories, of communities stepping in. But the question remains, if the structures are failing, what can truly stop the rising tide? In Seattle, the Emerald City's famous rain falls relentlessly, turning sidewalks into streams and tents into soaked shelters. Maria, a mother of two, clutches her daughter's hand as they walk past high-rise office towers. Just a year ago, she had a modest apartment and a full-time job as a caregiver. One unexpected medical bill and a minor rent increase later, she found herself living out of her car. Stories like Maria's illustrate a critical reality. Homelessness is no longer confined to the stereotypical street person. The new homeless are families, seniors, and the working poor. According to recent studies, over 30% of the homeless population are families with children, many of whom cycle between temporary shelters, motels, and doubled-up living arrangements with relatives or friends. Housing affordability sits at the center of the crisis. Nationwide, the gap between income and rent continues to widen. A worker earning the federal minimum wage would need to work over 90 hours per week to afford a modest one-bedroom apartment at fair market rent. This is not hypothetical. It's the reality in cities from Boston to Los Angeles. Affordable housing programs exist, but they face enormous hurdles. Funding is limited. Zoning laws restrict development, and opposition from local communities often stalls progress. Even when units are built, the wait lists are long, sometimes years, leaving families in precarious conditions. Healthcare and homelessness are deeply linked. Chronic illnesses, untreated mental health conditions, and injuries can push people into poverty quickly. For many, hospitals discharge patients without adequate support. And without housing, recovery becomes nearly impossible. Studies suggest that people experiencing homelessness visit emergency rooms at rates far higher than housed individuals, creating a cycle of instability and escalating costs for the healthcare system. Policies intended to help sometimes fall short. Shelter expansions provide immediate relief, but often lack the supportive services needed for long-term stability. Programs like rapid rehousing or housing first models show promise, but they are underfunded compared to the scale of need. Experts argue that sustainable solutions require both housing and comprehensive social support, from job training to mental health services. Communities respond in varied ways. Faith-based organizations, nonprofits, and neighborhood initiatives fill gaps left by government programs. Soup kitchens, donation drives, and volunteer outreach are lifelines for many. Yet even these compassionate efforts cannot fully address systemic factors like wage stagnation, high rent, and economic inequality. Maria's situation reflects a broader truth. Homelessness is a structural issue as much as a personal one. It's a chain reaction triggered by unexpected costs, lack of affordable housing, and social gaps. And for many, the experience leaves lasting scars, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. As the sun rises over Seattle, the question lingers. How can a society that prides itself on opportunity allow so many to fall through the cracks? And more importantly, what innovative approaches might finally break the cycle before it traps another generation? In the Rust Belt, towns once bustling with manufacturing now show boarded-up windows and empty lots. Rusted factories stand as monuments to a past era of stable jobs and thriving communities. Here, homelessness looks different. It's not always tents under bridges, but families living in cars, motels, or doubled up in cramped apartments. James, a former assembly line worker in Cleveland, recounts the day he lost his job. The plant closed abruptly, severance lasted 2 months, and unemployment barely covered bills. Soon, the family car became both transportation and bedroom. Stories like James reveal a critical factor: economic displacement. Entire industries have vanished or relocated, leaving skilled workers without opportunities and safety nets insufficient to catch them. Poverty and homelessness intersect closely. Areas with high unemployment rates often have higher concentrations of homelessness, but even employed individuals can fall into precarity. Gig economy jobs, contract work, and low-wage service positions rarely provide stable income or benefits. One missed paycheck can trigger eviction, loss of transportation, and spiraling debt. Education and housing policy also play a role. Many older urban neighborhoods lack investment, affordable housing options, and access to supportive services. Zoning restrictions and the rising cost of renovation prevent families from securing safe homes. Meanwhile, public housing is aging and often underfunded, and wait lists for new units can extend years. Mental health support remains a significant gap. In cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh, access to affordable care is limited, and community-based resources are stretched thin. While mental illness alone doesn't explain homelessness, it amplifies vulnerability. People who face both economic strain and untreated conditions are at high risk of becoming chronically homeless. Local governments attempt a variety of interventions. Rapid rehousing programs, eviction prevention initiatives, and supportive housing efforts all exist. Yet resources are inconsistent, fragmented, and often underfunded. Nonprofits try to bridge the gaps, but the scale of need frequently overwhelms available assistance. The Rust Belt illustrates a sobering pattern. Even outside coastal megacities, Homelessness grows where economic decline, inadequate housing, and social service limitations intersect. Families like James's often remain invisible, moving quietly from motel to motel, school to school, in a cycle difficult to break. It raises a crucial question. Can systemic reforms at both federal and local levels effectively address the intersection of economic displacement, housing scarcity, and social support? Or will communities continue to watch families slip through the cracks while policies lag behind? Across the Sun Belt, cities like Phoenix, Houston, and Miami are experiencing a different face of homelessness. Rapid population growth, soaring housing prices, and limited public infrastructure have created a perfect storm. Here, the homeless population often includes migrants, seasonal workers, and young adults leaving college without a safety net. In Phoenix, Maria Lopez, a single mother of 3, shares how rent increases forced her family from a small apartment into their car. 1 month behind, she says, and everything spiraled. Her story reflects a broader trend. Affordable housing is vanishing faster than wages can rise, and families with modest incomes are disproportionately affected. Economic inequality is stark. Luxury developments spring up near homeless encampments, highlighting a visual contrast that shocks residents and visitors alike. For many Sun Belt cities, the disparity between wealth and homelessness is impossible to ignore. Homelessness is no longer just an issue for urban planners. It's a visible, daily reality for citizens. Health risks are compounded by climate. In regions where summer temperatures exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit, living outdoors can be deadly. Public health experts warn that heat exposure, dehydration, and lack of access to cooling centers have led to preventable deaths among the homeless population. Extreme weather adds another layer to an already complex crisis. Nonprofits and community programs strive to fill gaps. Mobile health clinics, food distribution networks, and temporary shelters provide lifelines. Yet the sheer scale of demand exceeds supply. Social workers and volunteers often describe the work as triage, not cure, stabilizing immediate needs without addressing root causes. Policy debates intensify in these regions. Some argue for stricter law enforcement against encampments. Others push for aggressive investment in housing-first programs. The tension is visible on city council floors, in newspapers, and in public protests. Every decision feels urgent because people's lives are literally on the line. Families, seniors, veterans, and single adults navigate a labyrinth of challenges. Securing employment, finding a safe place to sleep, accessing health care, and managing paperwork for assistance programs. Even small delays can cascade into major setbacks. The system is complex, often bureaucratic, and can be overwhelming for those it is meant to serve. As the Sun Belt grows, so does the visibility of homelessness. It prompts a broader question. Can rapidly expanding cities implement solutions fast enough to prevent displacement from becoming permanent? And in the meantime, how do communities ensure that vulnerable populations are seen, supported, and protected? Amid the sprawling urban landscapes, certain cities have experimented with bold, innovative approaches to homelessness. Attempts that offer glimpses of what might be possible if policy, funding, and community action align. One widely discussed model is the housing-first approach. Instead of requiring individuals to address mental health or addiction issues before receiving housing, the program provides immediate, permanent homes paired with supportive services. Studies in cities like Salt Lake City and Seattle show that housing first can reduce chronic homelessness by up to 90% for participants, while also lowering emergency service costs. Nonprofits play a crucial role in complementing governmental efforts. Organizations like Pathways to Housing and local faith-based coalitions offer not only housing, but job training, health care, and counseling. They operate on the principle that stability in living arrangements is the foundation upon which other improvements, employment, health, relationships, can be built. Some municipalities have introduced tiny home villages, offering small, safe, and affordable dwellings with communal facilities. These projects are controversial, but provide shelter faster than conventional apartments and foster a sense of community. Early evaluations indicate they improve both physical and mental well-being for residents, while reducing encounters with law enforcement and emergency healthcare costs. The private sector is also becoming involved. Developers, investors, and philanthropists are experimenting with mixed-income housing, public-private partnerships, and rental assistance programs. These efforts are essential in cities where land costs are prohibitive and public funds are insufficient. Yet challenges remain. Public perception, zoning laws, and funding limitations slow the scaling of successful programs. Even evidence-based solutions like Housing First cannot reach everyone overnight, and gaps persist for families, veterans, and the newly homeless. Despite these obstacles, there is a quiet momentum. Neighborhood initiatives, volunteer networks, and grassroots advocacy push cities to consider holistic, humane strategies. Technology is being leveraged for case management, outreach, and resource coordination, making it easier for agencies to identify needs and respond quickly. The growing conversation around homelessness is also shifting narratives. Instead of blaming individuals, many communities now frame the issue as structural and solvable with deliberate action. Kevin, Maria, and James, each living different chapters of this crisis, remind us that behind the numbers are human beings whose lives can improve with thoughtful, sustained interventions. And as promising as these programs are, a question remains. Can local successes translate into a nationwide strategy that addresses systemic inequities and stops the cycle before it traps the next generation? Even with programs showing promise, the debate over how to fund and scale solutions remains intense. Federal, state, and local budgets are under pressure, and homelessness often competes with education, healthcare, and infrastructure for limited resources. Lawmakers argue over priorities, sometimes politicizing the issue, while individuals like Kevin and Maria wait for tangible support. Some experts advocate for a multi-pronged strategy: expanding affordable housing, increasing rental assistance, improving healthcare access, and investing in mental health and addiction services. They emphasize that no single intervention is enough. Systemic coordination is essential. Cities that integrate these measures see measurable improvements. Yet the scale needed to address nationwide homelessness is enormous. Community involvement is equally crucial. Volunteer networks, neighborhood associations, and local businesses contribute time, funding, and resources. Grassroots action, while small in isolation, creates a cumulative impact. Every shelter bed filled, every meal provided, every counseling session offered represents both immediate relief and a step toward breaking the cycle. Data-driven approaches also guide policy. By tracking the flow of individuals through shelters, hospitals, and social services, cities can identify patterns and target interventions more effectively. Yet, gaps in reporting, inconsistent definitions of homelessness, and undercounted populations mean that official numbers likely underrepresent reality, masking the full scope of the crisis. Public perception plays a subtle but important role. When communities recognize homelessness as a solvable structural issue rather than a moral failing, support for funding and inclusive policy increases. Education campaigns, media coverage, and storytelling, sharing the lived experiences of people like Kevin, Maria, and James, help shift attitudes, making voters more willing to back meaningful action. The conversation also raises difficult questions about responsibility and priorities. Should the government bear the primary burden? Can private enterprise, philanthropy, and community groups fill gaps? How do cities balance the immediate need for shelter with the long-term goal of sustainable housing? And amid these debates, the reality on the ground remains urgent. Every day, thousands of Americans wake without a home. Every night, tents, cars, and shelters host stories of resilience, struggle, and hope. Yet the numbers keep rising, prompting one stark question. If we already know what works, why does the crisis persist? Across the country, some innovative communities are showing that change is possible, not by temporary fixes, but by combining housing, support services, and policy reform. In cities like Salt Lake City, coordinated efforts between government agencies and nonprofits have dramatically reduced chronic homelessness. People once living on the streets now have permanent housing, access to health care, job training, and a chance to rebuild stability. Veteran programs illustrate what can happen when targeted, sustained support is provided. HUD-VASH vouchers, paired with mental health counseling and employment assistance, have enabled thousands of former service members to leave shelters behind. The results are tangible. Lower rates of hospitalizations, reduced interactions with law enforcement, and restored dignity for individuals and families. Local communities are also experimenting with creative housing solutions. Tiny home villages, repurposed shipping containers, and modular apartments offer rapid deployment and a sense of community. Residents report that these solutions not only provide safety, but also foster social connection and self-sufficiency. Programs in Austin and Denver have documented increased employment and improved health outcomes among participants. Philanthropy and private partnerships are stepping in to scale what governments alone cannot achieve. Developers are incentivized to include affordable units in new projects. Employers provide temporary housing support for low-income workers. Foundations fund case management, mental health counseling, and skill development programs. These combined efforts demonstrate that systemic problems can be addressed when stakeholders collaborate effectively. Yet challenges remain. Funding gaps, zoning restrictions, and public resistance slow progress. Even successful programs often serve only a fraction of those in need. However, these examples highlight a critical principle. Solutions must focus on stability first, then address underlying issues. When people have a secure place to live, everything else becomes possible. Healthcare, employment, education, and community engagement. The human stories behind these programs reveal resilience and hope. Kevin, after months in a supportive housing program, begins working part-time while reconnecting with his family. Maria enrolls in job training while her children attend school safely. James gains stability and starts volunteering at a local nonprofit, giving back to the very community that once helped him. These success stories remind us that while homelessness remains a profound national challenge, there is a path forward. Communities that combine compassion, strategic investment, and evidence-based solutions can make a real difference, turning the tide for individuals, families, and cities. But the larger question looms. Can the lessons from these localized successes be replicated nationwide to prevent the next wave of Americans from falling into homelessness? Homelessness in America is not an unsolvable tragedy. It is a challenge demanding deliberate action, collaboration, and sustained commitment. Across cities and states, a mix of strategies offers a blueprint for hope. Housing First programs, combined with healthcare, employment support, and community services, prove that stability is achievable and transformative. Federal initiatives, while unevenly funded, provide frameworks for local action. Programs like Section 8 rental assistance, community development grants, and veteran-specific housing vouchers create opportunities for intervention. When paired with local nonprofits and volunteer networks, They form a safety net capable of catching those at risk before they fall into chronic homelessness. Innovative city planning also matters. Zoning reforms that allow higher density housing, adaptive reuse of underutilized buildings, and incentives for developers to include affordable units expand the housing stock. Mobile services, health clinics, job training, and social support outreach ensure that vulnerable populations receive assistance even before they enter shelters. Education and advocacy shift public perception. Communities that understand homelessness as a structural problem, rather than a personal failing, are more likely to support funding, policy reforms, and inclusive initiatives. Stories like Kevin's, Maria's, and James humanize the issue, showing that anyone, given the right circumstances, could find themselves in a similar position. Individual action complements systemic change. Volunteering, donations, mentorship, and civic engagement help maintain services and influence policy. The combination of personal involvement and strategic planning creates momentum that can translate into measurable results. By focusing on what works, stability first, support services second, systemic reform third, cities can break cycles of displacement and provide meaningful opportunities for those who have struggled. The success stories emerging from Housing First initiatives, tiny home villages, and community partnerships demonstrate that homelessness is not an inevitable outcome. It is a solvable problem, if approached with coordination, compassion, and commitment. The journey from the streets to security is never easy, but as these examples show, it is possible. And for America, the challenge is clear. Sustain these efforts, expand successful programs, and ensure that the next generation is protected from falling through the cracks. For Kevin, Maria, James, and thousands like them, hope is not a luxury, it is a lifeline. And as we consider the numbers, the neighborhoods, the families, and the policies, one final question remains. What kind of society do we want to be? One that allows people to fall through the cracks, or one that ensures everyone has a place to call home